The betting hall of the Galactic Station hummed with excited chatter as dozens of alien species gathered around the massive viewing screen. Holographic displays showed a frozen world called Frost Haven, where temperatures never rose above minus 40 degrees and blizzards raged for weeks without stopping. Ice covered everything as far as the eye could see. Ambassador Krill adjusted his heating suit and pointed a scaly finger at the screen. His species came from desert worlds where the sun always shined hot and bright. The cold made him shiver just thinking about it. "Look at this madness," he said to the crowd. "The humans think they can build a colony on that ice ball. They will be frozen solid within 1 month. Next to him stood Captain Nix, whose people lived in cold places but always wore special suits to stay warm. Even with their advanced technology, they struggled in extreme cold. "I have seen the human supply lists," Nix said, shaking his head. "They bring basic heaters and simple tools, no proper thermal regulation systems, no advanced cold weather gear. They are walking into their own grave." The betting started immediately. Alien after alien placed wagers on how long the humans would last. Most bet they would give up and leave within 3 months. Some said they would last only weeks. A few cruel ones bet the humans would all freeze to death before help could arrive. Trade Minister Yule watched quietly from the back of the crowd. His people were known for being smart about business and rarely made bad bets. Something about the human manifest caught his attention, but he kept his thoughts to himself. On the frozen surface of Frost Haven, Commander Tom Bradley stepped out of the landing shuttle and felt the brutal cold hit his face like a physical blow. The wind cut through his thick jacket and made his eyes water instantly. Around him, 200 colonists unloaded supplies and equipment, their breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. The advance team had already set up temporary shelters using prefabricated domes and portable heaters. But Tom could see the strain on their power systems. Red warning lights blinked on several control panels. The fusion reactors were working harder than expected just to keep the basic shelters from becoming iceboxes. Dr. Amy Chen, the colony's head engineer, approached. With a worried expression on her face, ice crystals had formed in her hair during the short walk from the main shelter. "Commander, we have a problem," she said, her words creating puffs of steam. "The power consumption is 30% higher than we calculated. These storms are worse than anything we prepared for." Tom nodded and looked across the white landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow fell so thick he could barely see the nearest shelter dome 50 feet away. By every logical measure, the aliens were right to bet against them. This place was trying to kill them from the moment they arrived. But Tom smiled as he remembered winter mornings at his grandmother's house in Minnesota. She had lived through the worst blizzard in state history back in 1978. When the power went out for 2 weeks and the temperature dropped to -50, she had kept her whole family alive using tricks learned from her own grandmother. She always told him that the secret to surviving the cold was not fighting it, but learning to live with it. "Amy, how much do you know about traditional cold weather survival?" Tom asked as they walked toward the command shelter. She looked confused. "Sir, we have heating systems and insulated buildings. Traditional methods are not really relevant for a high-tech colony operation." Tom pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. The pages were yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes in his grandmother's careful script. "My grandmother survived impossible winters with nothing but knowledge passed down through generations. She always said that fancy equipment breaks, but old wisdom never fails." The next morning, Tom gathered his senior staff in the main command dome. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and their power reserves had dropped another 5% overnight. The heating systems worked constantly just to keep the temperature inside above freezing. "I know this sounds crazy," Tom began, but I want to try something different. Instead of fighting this environment with technology, we need to learn from people who survived in places like this for thousands of years. Engineer Rodriguez laughed. Commander, are you suggesting we build igloos? This is a modern colony, not a camping trip. Tom opened his grandmother's notebook and showed them pages of detailed drawings and instructions. These techniques kept people alive in conditions just as bad as this. Ice can be an incredible insulator if you know how to use it properly. Snow can protect you from wind better than metal walls. Body heat can warm a properly built shelter without using any power at all. Dr. Chen studied the notebook with growing interest. The physics actually makes sense, she admitted. Compressed snow has excellent insulation properties. Ice construction could create thermal mass that holds heat much longer than our current materials. The alien observers in orbit watched through their sensors as unusual activity began around the human camp. Instead of expanding their technological shelters, the humans were venturing out into the storm with simple tools. They appeared to be cutting blocks from the snow and ice, dragging them back toward their settlement area. Ambassador Krill increased the magnification on his viewing screen. What are they doing? This behavior makes no sense. They should be conserving energy and staying inside their heated structures. Captain Nix ran thermal scans of the human colony. Their power consumption is still climbing, but now they are engaging in heavy physical labor in sub-zero temperatures. This appears to be panic behavior. They are making desperate, illogical choices. But Trade Minister Yule noticed something different. In the data, the humans were not moving randomly or frantically. Their activities showed careful planning and coordination. Groups worked together with specific purposes. Tools were distributed efficiently. Someone was giving clear, organized instructions. Tom worked alongside his colonists, teaching them to cut uniform blocks from the packed snow and ice. His grandmother's notebook contained detailed instructions for selecting the right type of snow, cutting blocks to proper specifications, and arranging them in stable patterns. The work was hard and cold, but the colonists began to understand the logic behind it. The key is getting the spiral right, Tom explained as they laid the foundation for their first ice structure. Each block has to support the next one, and the dome shape distributes weight naturally. My grandmother learned this from people who built homes like this for generations. As the first small ice dome took shape, something remarkable happened. Even without any heating system inside, the temperature within the structure was 15 degrees warmer than outside. The thick ice walls blocked the cutting wind, and the dome shape held warm air naturally. Dr. Chen took measurements and shook, her head in amazement. Commander, this is actually working. The thermal properties are better than I calculated. If we can build enough of these structures, we might be able to reduce our power consumption significantly. Tom looked at his grandmother's notebook and smiled. The aliens had bet that humans would freeze because they thought humans would fight the cold with technology alone. But humans had survived ice ages and polar expeditions long before they had advanced heating systems. Sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best ones. The storm continued to rage across Frost Haven, but inside the growing collection of ice domes, the human colonists worked by candlelight and body heat, warm and safe while using almost no power at all. 3 weeks had passed since the first humans landed on Frost Haven, and the betting pools across the galaxy were paying close attention. Every alien who had placed money on human failure was watching their monitors with growing confidence. The thermal readings showed exactly what they expected to see. Dr. Amy Chen sat in the dimly lit command center, staring at numbers that spelled disaster. The colony's main computer displayed power consumption graphs in bright red, warning that their energy reserves were dropping faster than planned. 2 of the smaller habitat domes had already been shut down to save power, forcing 30 colonists to crowd into the remaining shelters. She rubbed her tired eyes and tried to calculate different scenarios, but every simulation showed the same result. At their current rate of energy use, They had maybe 6 weeks before complete system failure. After that, the heating systems would stop working, and the colony would become uninhabitable within days. The door to the command center opened, letting in a blast of cold air and Commander Tom Bradley. Ice crystals covered his jacket, and his cheeks were red from the bitter wind outside. But he was smiling, which seemed impossible given their desperate situation. "Amy, we need to discuss evacuation protocols," she said before he could speak. "I have run the numbers 12 different ways. We cannot sustain this colony with our current resources. The aliens were right. We need to call for rescue ships before it is too late." Tom sat down across from her and pulled out his grandmother's old notebook. The worn pages contained hundreds of handwritten notes, sketches, and diagrams that looked ancient compared to their high-tech surroundings. "Before we give up, I want to try something that might sound crazy." Dr. Chen looked at the notebook with confusion. "Sir, we need engineering solutions, not family recipes. This is a survival situation that requires advanced technology and careful resource management." "Tell me about the ice formations we have cataloged so far," Tom said, ignoring her protests. He flipped through pages filled with his grandmother's careful handwriting. "What have our geological surveys found about the composition and thermal properties of the frozen materials on this planet?" She accessed her computer files and brought up detailed charts and measurements. Standard frozen water formations, mostly. Some interesting crystal structures in the deeper ice layers. The surface snow varies in density depending on wind patterns and temperature fluctuations. Nothing that changes our survival calculations. Tom studied her data while comparing it to notes in his grandmother's book. "What about the insulation values of compacted snow versus loose powder? Have we measured how different ice construction techniques might affect thermal retention?" Dr. Chen stared at him. "Commander, are you seriously suggesting we build igloos? This is a high-tech colony operation with 200 people, not a wilderness survival exercise. We have fusion reactors, atmospheric processors, and advanced life support systems. We cannot abandon modern technology for primitive construction methods." But Tom was already sketching in the margins of his grandmother's notebook, combining her traditional techniques with his understanding of their current situation. "Amy, my grandmother survived the worst blizzard in North Dakota history in 1978. The temperature dropped to minus 60 degrees, the power failed for 2 weeks, and the roads were blocked for a month. She kept 7 people alive using nothing but snow, body heat, and knowledge that was 100 years old even then." He showed her pages filled with detailed diagrams of ice construction techniques, wind pattern analyses, and thermal management, strategies that had been tested by generations of people who lived in impossible conditions. "She always told me that fancy does not mean better. It just means more things can break when you need them most." Dr. Chen looked at the primitive drawings and tried to reconcile them with her engineering training. The physics actually made sense, but the idea of abandoning their technological advantage seemed like surrendering to the harsh environment rather than conquering it. Outside their heated command center, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees as Frosthaven entered what passed for night on a world where the sun barely rose above the horizon. The fusion reactors hummed constantly, burning through fuel reserves to maintain barely livable conditions inside their artificial shelters. "Commander, even if these traditional methods work for small groups, we have 200 colonists to house and feed. The scale is completely different from anything your grandmother experienced." Tom nodded and showed her more pages from the notebook. She did not just know construction techniques, she understood how to organize communities for cold weather survival, how to distribute work efficiently, how to maintain morale when conditions seem hopeless, how to make group decisions that keep everyone alive. He pointed to detailed notes about food preservation, clothing techniques, and social organization during extreme weather emergencies. The people who taught her these skills lived in harsh environments for thousands of years. They knew how to support large groups using minimal resources. The alien monitoring stations in orbit detected unusual activity as humans began moving across the ice fields with purpose and organization. Instead of the panicked, desperate behavior the observers expected from a failing colony, the humans appeared to be implementing some kind of coordinated plan. Ambassador Krill adjusted his sensors and increased magnification. "This is strange behavior for a dying colony. They should be conserving energy and staying inside their shelters. Why are they engaging in heavy outdoor labor?" Captain Nix ran thermal scans and found confusing results. Their power consumption is still critical, but now they are expending significant physical energy in sub-zero conditions. Perhaps this is some kind of human religious ritual before death. But Trade Minister Yule noticed patterns in the human activity that suggested careful planning rather than desperation. Groups moved with specific purposes. Tools were distributed efficiently, and the work appeared to follow detailed instructions. Someone was giving clear, organized direction to these activities. Tom worked alongside his colonists, teaching them to identify different types of snow and ice that would work best for construction. His grandmother's notebook contained detailed instructions for testing materials, cutting blocks to proper specifications, and organizing work crews for maximum efficiency in cold conditions. "The important thing is understanding what you are working with," Tom explained, as he showed a group of engineers how to test snow density. "Not all snow is the same. Not all ice cuts the same way. You have to read the conditions and adapt your techniques accordingly." The colonists, who had spent weeks feeling helpless against the brutal environment, began to understand that they were not victims of the cold. They were learning to work with it, to use its properties to their advantage, and to build solutions. From the materials that surrounded them everywhere, Dr. Chen found herself fascinated despite her initial skepticism. As she watched Tom demonstrate ice-cutting techniques that created perfectly fitted building blocks, she began to see the engineering principles behind traditional methods that had kept people alive for generations. "Commander, the thermal mass. Calculations are actually quite sophisticated," she admitted, as she measured temperatures inside their first experimental structure. "These ice walls store and radiate heat much more efficiently than I expected. The construction techniques create natural insulation properties that our modern materials cannot match." Tom smiled as he remembered his grandmother's voice telling him that humans had always been clever enough to survive anything nature could throw at them. They just had to remember how to use the wisdom that older generations had passed down through years of harsh experience. The storm continued to rage across Frost Haven, but inside the growing collection of ice structures, human colonists worked by firelight and body heat, learning skills that their ancestors had used to survive ice ages, long before anyone dreamed of traveling to other worlds. The morning sun cast long shadows across Frost Haven, as Tom Bradley watched his colony transform in ways that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Instead of the failing technological outpost that alien observers expected to see, the human settlement was growing and adapting using methods that were older than space travel itself. Groups of colonists worked together across the ice fields, cutting uniform blocks from packed snow and hauling them back to construction sites with simple sleds and ropes. The work was hard and cold, but there was energy and purpose in their movements that had been missing during the desperate early weeks of the colony. Tom carried his grandmother's notebook as he moved between work crews, teaching techniques that she had learned from Inuit elders during her younger years in Alaska. The notebook contained detailed diagrams showing how to spiral ice blocks upward to create stable dome structures, how to cut ventilation holes that prevented carbon dioxide buildup, and how to design entrance tunnels that trapped cold air while allowing access. "Remember, each block has to support the next one," Tom called out to a team building their third ice dome. "The spiral pattern distributes weight naturally, so you do not need heavy support beams or complex engineering. The shape does the work. For you." Engineer Rodriguez, who had laughed at the idea of igloos just weeks earlier, now supervised a crew building the most ambitious structure yet. "Commander, "This is actually brilliant engineering," he admitted as he measured the curve of their dome. "The mathematics are elegant. No wasted materials, no unnecessary complexity, just pure structural efficiency." Dr. Chen had become completely fascinated by the physics involved in traditional cold weather construction. She took measurements inside each completed structure and found results that challenged everything she thought she knew about thermal management. "Tom, these buildings are maintaining internal temperatures 30 degrees warmer than outside using only body heat and small candles. The thermal mass of the ice walls is providing insulation better than our manufactured materials." But the ice domes were only part of the transformation taking place across the colony. Other teams had begun implementing more of Grandmother Bradley's collected wisdom. They dug storage pits lined with ice blocks to preserve food without requiring any electrical refrigeration. They created wind barriers using carved ice panels that redirected the brutal surface winds around living areas instead of trying to resist them with brute force. The most ambitious project involved creating a network of connected tunnels that allowed movement between structures without exposure to the harsh surface conditions. Tom had found detailed instructions in his grandmother's notebook for building underground passages that stayed warm through careful air circulation and strategic placement. "My grandmother learned this from people whose ancestors survived the last ice age," Tom explained, as he showed colonists how to dig and reinforce tunnel walls. "They understood that the best way to deal with extreme cold is to get below it, around it, or inside it. Fighting it head-on just wastes energy you cannot spare." The alien monitoring stations in orbit were registering readings that made no sense according to their understanding of human capabilities. The colony's power consumption had dropped by more than half, but instead of the expected collapse, the settlement was expanding rapidly. Ambassador Krill stared at his displays in confusion. "This is impossible. The thermal imaging shows dozens of new structures, all maintaining comfortable living temperatures. Where are they getting the energy? Have they discovered some kind of geothermal source?" Captain Nix ran detailed scans, searching for hidden power sources or advanced heating technology that might explain what they were seeing. "I detect no unusual energy signatures, no geothermal activity, no hidden reactors. According to our instruments, they are somehow heating large structures using almost no technological power sources." The most puzzling readings came from structures that appeared to be made entirely of ice and snow. Logic dictated that such buildings should be death traps, freezing anyone inside within hours. Instead, the thermal signatures showed comfortable, living conditions that remained stable even during the worst storms. Trade Minister Yule quietly increased his bet on human success while studying the data more carefully than his colleagues. He noticed patterns in the construction techniques that suggested sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics and structural engineering, even though the humans were using the most primitive materials available. Inside the growing ice village, human colonists had begun to thrive in ways that surprised even Tom. Children attended lessons in ice block classrooms that stayed warm through shared body heat and strategically placed heating elements. Adults worked in workshops carved directly into glacier faces, where the surrounding ice provided natural insulation and protection from surface storms. The fusion reactors, no longer strained to heat entire dome complexes, were redirected to power manufacturing equipment and communication systems. For the first time since landing, the colony had surplus energy that could be used for expansion and improvement rather than mere survival. Tom found Dr. Chen in her new laboratory, which was built entirely from ice blocks, but maintained perfect working temperature through clever ventilation design and minimal electrical heating. She was analyzing samples of locally produced materials and running efficiency calculations that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. "Commander, I have been studying the resource efficiency of our new methods," she said, looking up from her work with excitement. "We are not just surviving anymore. We are operating at higher productivity levels than our original projections for a fully established colony." Tom looked around the ice laboratory, where advanced scientific equipment worked perfectly in a structure built using techniques that were thousands of years old. His grandmother would have been amazed to see her survival wisdom applied on an alien world, but she would not have been surprised that it worked. Amy, my grandmother always said that humans are at their best when they stop trying to conquer nature and start learning to work with it. We were not supposed to defeat this planet. We were supposed to become part of it. The transformation extended beyond construction and heating to every aspect of colony life. Colonists learned to read weather patterns by observing ice formation and wind behavior. They developed clothing techniques that layered materials for maximum warmth retention using locally available resources. They discovered food preparation methods that required minimal energy while providing maximum nutrition and comfort. Most importantly, they learned to move across the frozen landscape with confidence and efficiency. What had seemed like a hostile, alien environment during their first desperate weeks now felt like home territory that they understood and could navigate safely. The alien observers continued to watch in amazement as the impossible became routine. The human colony was not just surviving but flourishing in conditions that should have killed them months ago. The betting pools that had confidently predicted human failure were now facing the reality that they had seriously underestimated both human adaptability and the wisdom contained in traditional survival knowledge. Tom stood in the central meeting hall, a large ice structure that comfortably housed 50 people using only shared body heat and candle warmth for heating. On the walls, carved directly into the ice, were detailed instructions and diagrams for cold weather construction, weather prediction, and survival techniques. Future colonists would find a complete manual for thriving on frozen worlds, combining ancient human wisdom with modern technology in ways that created sustainable communities. The aliens had bet that humans would freeze, but they had not understood that humans had been surviving impossible winters for thousands of years before they ever left their home planet. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the ice village, human voices could be heard laughing, talking, and planning for a future that looked brighter and warmer than anyone had dared to hope during those first desperate weeks on Frost Haven. Winter storms on Frost Haven had grown even more violent as the planet moved further from its distant sun, but inside the human settlement, something remarkable was happening. The colony that alien observers had expected to see struggling desperately, for survival was instead humming with productive activity and confident expansion. Tom Bradley walked through the tunnel network that now connected every major structure in the settlement. The passages were carved from solid ice and lined with reflective panels that distributed light efficiently throughout the underground system. Colonists moved freely between workshops, living areas, and common spaces without ever exposing themselves to the brutal surface conditions. The transformation went far beyond simple survival. The fusion reactors, freed from the impossible task of heating inefficient dome structures, now powered manufacturing equipment that produced goods, tools, and materials for trade with other human colonies. What had started as a desperate survival outpost was becoming a productive industrial center. In the main workshop area, carved directly into a glacier face, Engineer Rodriguez supervised teams producing advanced cold weather equipment using techniques that combined traditional craftsmanship with modern technology. "Commander, we are getting orders from colonies on 3 different worlds," he reported with enthusiasm. "Everyone wants to know how we make thermal clothing that works better than manufactured gear at half the cost." The workshop itself demonstrated the principles that had made their survival possible. Thick ice walls provided excellent insulation, while carefully designed ventilation systems maintained comfortable working conditions using minimal heating. Traditional techniques created workspace that was more efficient and comfortable than their original high-tech facilities. Dr. Chen approached with a tablet full of production reports and efficiency calculations. "Tom, I have been analyzing our resource management over the past month. We are operating at 150% of our original productivity projections, and that is while supporting twice as many people as we planned. She showed him graphs that tracked everything from energy consumption to material production to food security. Every measurement showed the same pattern of improvement and growth that seemed impossible given their harsh environment and primitive construction methods. The most amazing thing is how the techniques scale up, Dr. Chen continued. Traditional methods do not just work for small groups. They actually become more efficient with larger populations because you can share resources and distribute work more effectively. Tom nodded as he remembered his grandmother's stories about entire communities that survived harsh winters by working together and sharing knowledge. She had always emphasized that cold weather survival was as much about social cooperation as it was about technical skills. The colony now housed over 400 people, including families with children who had arrived on recent supply ships. The children adapted to ice block schools and tunnel playgrounds with the natural flexibility of youth, learning to read weather patterns and move confidently across frozen terrain as if they had been born on Frost Haven. Tom found a group of kids building their own small ice structure near the main settlement, following instructions they had memorized from watching adults work. Their construction was technically perfect, demonstrating that traditional building techniques could be learned and passed down just as effectively as any modern skill. "Mr. Tom, look how warm it is inside," called 8-year-old Lisa as she showed him the interior of their miniature dome. The temperature was indeed comfortable, maintained entirely by the body heat of 3 children and the thermal properties of properly constructed ice walls. The alien monitoring stations continued to register readings that challenged everything they thought they understood about human capabilities and limitations. The colony's thermal signatures showed stable, comfortable living conditions across dozens of structures, yet power consumption remained at levels that should only support basic survival functions. Ambassador Krill had called for detailed technical analysis of the human construction methods, convinced that they must be using some kind of advanced technology disguised as primitive building techniques. There has to be some explanation for these readings. Frozen water cannot provide this level of thermal regulation without significant energy input. Captain Nix had dispatched reconnaissance drones to get closer visual inspection of the human structures. The images they returned showed buildings that appeared to be made entirely of cut ice blocks, with no visible heating systems, power connections, or advanced materials. According to our analysis, these structures should be uninhabitable death traps, yet our thermal scans show comfortable living conditions in every one. The most confusing data came from productivity measurements. Not only were the humans surviving in impossible conditions, they were manufacturing goods, processing materials, and establishing trade relationships with other colonies. Their economic output exceeded that of technologically advanced settlements on much more hospitable worlds. Trade Minister Yule had been quietly studying human colony reports and historical data, trying to understand patterns that his colleagues were missing. He discovered references to something called traditional ecological knowledge, that human cultures had developed over thousands of years of living in extreme environments. The humans were not just using primitive construction techniques, they were applying sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics, resource management, and community organization that had been tested and refined by countless generations of people who lived in harsh conditions. The knowledge was ancient, but it was also highly advanced in ways that modern technology often overlooked. Tom stood in his office, which was carved into the ice wall of the main administrative complex. The space was comfortable and well lit, warmed by a small heating element and the thermal mass of surrounding ice. He was writing in his grandmother's notebook, adding new techniques and observations that future colonists could use. Dr. Chen knocked on his doorframe and entered with news that would have seemed impossible during their first desperate weeks on Frost Haven. "Commander, we just received a communication from the Colonial Administration. They want to designate Frost Haven as a regional training center for cold weather colonization." She showed him official documents requesting detailed reports on their construction methods, resource management techniques, and community organization strategies. Other human colonies were struggling with cold weather challenges on dozens of worlds, and the administrators wanted to understand how Frosthaven had not only survived but thrived in conditions worse than anything previously attempted. They are offering to send engineering teams and anthropologists to study our methods, Dr. Chen continued. They want to document everything we have learned and create standardized training programs for other colonies facing similar challenges. Tom smiled as he thought about his grandmother's reaction to hearing that her winter survival knowledge would be taught in colonial academies across human space. She had learned those techniques from people who never imagined they would be used on alien worlds, but wisdom that helped humans survive always found new applications. The success on Frosthaven was already influencing colonial policy throughout human space. Worlds that had been considered too harsh for settlement were being reevaluated. Traditional knowledge specialists were being added to colonial planning teams. The combination of ancient wisdom and modern technology was opening up, possibilities that pure technological approaches had missed. Outside his office, Tom could hear the sounds of a thriving community. Children played in ice tunnels, adults worked in warm workshops, and families gathered in comfortable common areas. The storms still raged across the surface, but they no longer threatened the survival of the colony. Humans had learned to live with Frosthaven's brutal conditions instead of fighting them. The alien betting pools were preparing to pay out winnings to the few who had bet on human success. But the real prize was not money. The humans had proven something that would change how both humans and aliens thought about adaptation, survival, and the power of knowledge passed down through generations of people who refused to give up when conditions seemed impossible. 6 months after the first desperate landing on Frosthaven, the human colony was preparing to welcome its first official diplomatic visitors from the Galactic Council. The aliens who had bet confidently on human failure were coming to see for themselves how the impossible had become routine. The transport ships descended through swirling snow toward a settlement that looked nothing like what the alien observers had expected. Instead of a struggling outpost barely hanging on to survival, they found a thriving community of permanent ice architecture, busy workshops, and humans who moved across the frozen landscape with the confidence of people who belonged there. Ambassador Krill emerged from his heated transport, wearing multiple thermal suits and still shivering in the brutal cold that had become comfortable daily life for the human colonists. His first glimpse of the settlement left him speechless. Dozens of dome structures carved from ice stretched across the landscape, connected by an intricate network of tunnels and walkways that bustled with activity. Commander Tom Bradley met. The delegation wearing only a thick jacket and insulated gloves, completely comfortable in conditions that had the aliens struggling despite their advanced heating suits. Welcome to Frosthaven, Ambassador. I hope you will find your visit educational. The tour began in the main tunnel network, where the aliens discovered a complete underground city carved directly from ice and maintained at comfortable temperatures using techniques they could not identify or understand. Children played in side passages, while adults moved efficiently between workshops, living areas, and community spaces. Captain Nix kept checking his instruments, convinced they were malfunctioning. Commander Bradley, our thermal analysis indicates these structures should be lethal to your species within hours, yet we observe comfortable living conditions throughout your settlement. How do you generate sufficient heat? Tom led them into the central meeting hall, a large dome structure that easily accommodated 50 people. The walls were carved ice, decorated with detailed diagrams and instructions, and the space was warmed entirely by shared body heat, small candles, and a single modest heating unit. Captain, humans have been surviving in extreme cold for thousands of years. We just had to remember the techniques our ancestors used. Dr. Chen joined the tour, carrying productivity reports and efficiency data that amazed the alien visitors. Gentlemen, Frosthaven is now operating as a profitable industrial center. We produce advanced cold weather equipment, process local materials, and maintain trade relationships with colonies throughout this sector. She showed them workshops carved into glacier faces where humans manufactured goods using traditional techniques enhanced by modern tools. The combination created products that were more effective and less expensive than anything produced by fully automated industrial facilities on more hospitable worlds. The aliens watched in fascination as colonists demonstrated ice construction, techniques that created perfectly fitted building blocks without power tools. They observed food preservation methods that required no electrical refrigeration. They saw clothing production that created thermal protection superior to manufactured materials using only local resources and traditional craftsmanship. Ambassador Krill, struggling to maintain body temperature despite his heating suit, asked the question that had puzzled alien observers for months. How did you know these primitive techniques would succeed where advanced technology failed? Tom pulled out his grandmother's worn notebook, its pages filled with handwritten wisdom accumulated over decades of harsh winters. This contains knowledge passed down through generations of humans who survived in conditions that seemed impossible. My grandmother taught me that the best technology is the kind that works when everything else fails. He opened the notebook to pages filled with detailed diagrams of ice construction, weather prediction techniques, and resource management strategies that had been tested by countless people over thousands of years. She learned these methods from people whose ancestors lived through ice ages. They understood things about surviving extreme cold that we forgot when we started depending entirely on manufactured solutions. The alien delegation spent 3 days studying the human colony, trying to understand how traditional knowledge could be so effective in extreme conditions. They observed families living comfortably in ice houses, children learning in ice block schools, and adults working productively in workshops that should have been uninhabitable. Trade Minister Yule, who had quietly bet on human success months earlier, finalized contracts for human consultation services to help other species develop cold weather colonization techniques. The demand was enormous. Dozens of alien civilizations were struggling with harsh environment challenges on worlds throughout the galaxy. Commander Bradley, we would like to establish a permanent diplomatic mission here, Yule announced during the final day of their visit. Your colony has demonstrated solutions to problems that affect settlement efforts across multiple star systems. We believe there is much we can learn from human traditional knowledge. The implications extended far beyond Frost Haven. Human colonies, on challenging worlds throughout space, were already requesting technical assistance and training programs based on traditional survival methods. Colonial academies were developing new curricula that combined modern technology with ancient wisdom. Most importantly, the success on Frost Haven had changed how both humans and aliens thought about adaptation and survival. The assumption that advanced technology was always superior to traditional methods had been proven false in the most dramatic way possible. Tom stood outside the main settlement as the alien ships prepared to depart, watching new snow fall on a colony that had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The betting pools across the galaxy were settling their accounts, and the humans had won far more than just survival. They had proven that adaptation and wisdom could triumph over any challenge. The alien delegates departed with detailed reports, video documentation, and formal requests for human experts to assist with cold weather challenges on worlds throughout their territories. What had started as a desperate colonization attempt was becoming a diplomatic and economic success that would influence galactic settlement policies for generations. Dr. Chen approached with the latest population reports. Tom, we now have over 600 colonists, with 3 more transport ships scheduled to arrive next month. The Colonial Administration wants to expand Frost Haven into a major regional center for cold weather operations. Tom opened his grandmother's notebook and added a new entry in careful handwriting. Day 180 on Frost Haven. Weather clear and cold. Colony population now 600 and growing rapidly. Grandmother would be proud to see her winter wisdom helping people survive on an alien world. The entry joined hundreds of others that documented their transformation from desperate survivors to confident residents of a world that had initially seemed determined to kill them. The notebook had become the foundation for a new field of study that combined traditional ecological knowledge with modern colonial technology. In the distance, construction crews were building new ice block structures using techniques that were now being taught in colonial academies across human space. The settlement that the aliens had bet would fail within months was becoming a permanent city that could thrive indefinitely in conditions that had once seemed impossible to survive. Tom thought about his grandmother's voice telling him that humans had always been clever enough to survive anything nature could throw at them. She had been right in ways she never could have imagined. Her winter survival knowledge was now helping. Humans colonize frozen worlds throughout the galaxy, proving that wisdom never becomes obsolete, no matter how far technology advances. The storms continued to rage across Frosthaven's surface, but they no longer represented a threat to human survival. They had become simply weather, part of the natural environment that humans had learned to live with rather than fight against. The colony had grown from a technological outpost into a community that belonged on this world. Inside the warm ice, structures, families gathered for evening meals while children did homework by candlelight supplemented with efficient electric lamps. Adults planned expansion projects and discussed trade negotiations with other colonies. The sounds of a thriving civilization echoed through tunnels carved from ice that had once seemed like humanity's greatest enemy. The aliens had bet that humans would freeze, but they had underestimated something fundamental about human nature. When faced with impossible conditions, humans did not give up or rely solely on technology to save them. They remembered the wisdom of their ancestors, adapted ancient knowledge to new challenges, and found ways to thrive in environments that seemed determined to defeat them. Tom closed his grandmother's notebook and smiled as he looked across the settlement that proved her teachings were still relevant in an age of space travel and alien contact. The best technology was indeed the kind that worked when everything else failed, and sometimes the oldest solutions were still the most effective ones. The legacy of a woman who had survived impossible winters in North Dakota now lived on in the ice cities of Frosthaven, where humans had learned once again that wisdom, adaptability, and determination could overcome any challenge the universe might present. The aliens had lost their bet, but humanity had won something far more valuable than money. They had proven that no environment was too harsh for humans who remembered how to work with nature instead of fighting against it. As night fell across the frozen landscape, the lights of human civilization glowed warm and steady through ice walls that had become home to hundreds of people who had learned to love a world that once tried to kill them. The grandmother's legacy lived on in every warm room, every successful harvest, and every child who learned that humans could survive anywhere if they remembered the wisdom of those who came before them.